Welcome to Galaxy Tenants UFO Chronicles Part 1. Today we feature a handful of stories surrounding UFO sightings as well as a couple of songs courtesy of the Henhouse Prowlers titled Uncle Bubba and Sura Yako.
So my name is Mandy. I live in southwest Montana. We've been here for about a year, so that's been its own journey. And where this took place was in rural Michigan, around Fremont. I was driving back from Grand Rapids. I think I was like 17 or 18. And I told my mom I was at a friend's house, but I was definitely having a lot of alcohol in Grand Rapids. And stayed the night. That night, I was driving from Grand Rapids to Fremont, and it was dark, and there's all these like farm roads, and I look out and I see something in like a stretched triangle. Couldn't actually make out what the object was in the sky, but it definitely had a predominant front light and two back lights. And then I was kind of slowed down a little bit. It's like 50 mile an hour around there, and I was watching it, and I saw it zip from side to side, front, back, and then it let a light down, just like in the movies, and that's when like all of the hair on my neck stood up. I was extremely creeped out, and the way the light came down, I'll never forget that. It was like releasing a ladder. It was like, it didn't just go from point A to B, it like cascaded, and then it disappeared. It was completely gone. And I remember thinking like, man, like we don't have any airports around here. A helicopter maybe could perform those maneuvers, but I don't know how. We don't have any like military bases near there or anything where I could think of there would be like I was trying to logic myself out of it, but I felt very creeped out. And honestly, like this overwhelming feeling came over me that was like, I'm not allowed to talk about it. And that wasn't something like immediately when something like that happens, you want to tell everybody. You know, like, hey, this is super creepy. And I've never been one to really be concerned about other people's opinions of me. So I wasn't afraid of somebody to think I was strange, because I've always been pretty strange. It was very terrifying. I remember running from my car to my house, like looking up into the sky, very leery, and came inside. And my mom was standing there. She's like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah." I debated on telling her, and I just went into my room. And then I came out later and I like told her in her ear as a whisper. I was just like really freaked out that I wasn't allowed to talk about it for no real reason.
Mm-hmm. How far away were you when you saw the UFO, I guess?
Right. I was probably like a 15-minute drive to the town part of Fremont where we were living at the time by the high school. So yeah, it's a lot of like house, field, farming.
How far were you? Were you a football field from it? Were you, was it like a mile away in the distance? How far?
It was probably about a mile would make sense to me. I could see the house in the distance that it was near, and like, it's just like a house, some trees, and then farmland. So we had like a field between us.
Could you get a sense of size, of what size it was based on your perspective and where you were standing?
Yeah, I would say like about the size of what a helicopter would be, or, you know, and I've looked up images of like helicopters at night. I did like some research that night because I was really obviously like nervous about it, and they don't have lights like that, not in that shape or formation. And there are some planes that have the triple lights, the one in the front and the two in the back, but they definitely don't fly that low and with that kind of maneuvering.
What color were the lights?
They were all the same. They were like a white, I want to say, or yellow.
Did you get a sense that it was man-made or military, or did it look like something that was completely unfamiliar in its angles and in its shape, where you thought that it may not be of human origin?
It felt closer to like a military piece of equipment, just because of its size and how low it was. But I had never seen anything like that before. And I've gone to like things like to go see the Blue Angels and stuff like that. Like I've seen those planes in action, but this wasn't anything that I was familiar with. And I was looking when I got online. I was looking for, oh, that's it. It's a weird plane. It's crop dusting at night, or something that I could apply some real logic to. But yeah, that moment never came. The only thing that I found that was similar were other people's testimonies to having seen something like that without any explanation, which creeped me out.
Was there any sort of sound, or could you get a sense of people often describe with UFOs, the crickets will stop, that the birds will stop, that, there's a sort of silence that comes over an area. It could be that it was obviously far off in your case, but did you get a sense of any sort of auditory changes?
I didn't, because I was in the car driving, and it was like an 82 Plymouth Sundance. So Lord knows there were some parts probably rattling, but I didn't have any audible changes. It was definitely visual. It was definitely different than anything I'd ever seen. And I just can't describe that overwhelming feeling that I wasn't allowed to talk to it. I'm even a little nervous right now talking about it, not because we're doing this interview, but because I still have that feeling that it's some secret, or I'm going to get in trouble for talking about it. I don't understand where that came from.
That's interesting. Do you have any thoughts or conclusions at all, or assumptions about what you saw or what you experienced?
I honestly think, like, if I could, I really would like to logic my way out of this, but if I can't, and I do believe that, I think it's extremely neurotic to assume that we're the only life forms out there, like it's just such an expansive space. I think they were checking it out, like what else would that light be for? They wanted to investigate something, but I didn't feel like I was in danger, which is strange. I was creeped out and I really wanted an explanation, but I never felt like it was something dangerous. It almost felt more curious than anything.
My name is Jesse Filippelli. I live in Dillon, Colorado, and my experience happened in Weston, Florida, which is about 20 miles west of Fort Lauderdale, so pretty far south. Basically, me and my friends, I was probably 19 at the time, and my friends were all about the same age, and I will lay this out completely. We had taken some doses, and also I will lay this out.
Just to be clear, for those who don't know what doses are, that is LSD.
Yeah, we took some LSD. About 1 or 2 hits, or in that range, nothing crazy. And so we had all tripped before, so we had experience with this. And I want to make this clear. We dropped at sunset of whatever day it was, and the experience didn't happen until the next morning. So we're talking like 10 hours in. So way beyond the point for anyone who's like taken it before, like that's no longer the point where you're having like a type of hallucination where you're like seeing God or anything like that. It's way come down zone. So that night we hung out at a friend's house all night. At some point way later, like 4 a.m, we decided to leave that friend's house and go back from that little city to Weston. And we were in our friend's Mini Cooper. And going back into town, he gets a flat tire. And Mini Coopers don't carry spares on them, or at least they didn't back in the time. So we're all like 19 years old in the suburban town that we grew up in. And we get a flat tire, and we happen to be right near the town center, like this little plaza area thing. So we managed to get a car into a parking spot. Now, we're sitting in the car, and this is when the experience kind of happens. And there's 4 of us in this Mini Cooper. And I can just so vividly remember, like I'm in the back right seat. And we're looking out into the distance, and we grew up kind of by the Everglades, so there's no hills or anything. You can kind of see off in the distance other than just trees. And one of us just kind of spotted this thing out in the distance. You could see movement. I recall lights, like maybe like a green flashing light. And the only way that I can really explain it as to what it was that we were seeing, it was like any type of camouflage technology. How, like, I guess almost how it looks gassy. Like you can tell there's something there, but you don't see a physical object. Almost like the Avengers, their ship like turns into like that mirror reflection kind of thing. So it kind of looked like that. I recall kind of like a triangular or like squarish, boxy shape of it. And it kind of made its way over, and we just watched it for a while, and it came closer and closer. And at some point we were like, guys, like almost in a fear or interest, like silence, like we should get out of the car. Like, let's get out of the car. And I remember struggling to get out of the car, and we were looking up, and we watched this thing just kind of come over us and then stop for a moment and then like pass us, go past some trees and disappear. And Peter, who was with us, like one of my best friends, recalls seeing like all the birds in a tree kind of like flutter away. And that was when it kind of passed and took off. And then there's one other really weird thing about it, that the driver of the car, he got out and he was recording it on his phone. And we're 19. Like, we know how to work a phone. And he pulled it out and tried to videotape it. And when we tried watching the video later, it was black, but it had audio. So that's like really weird. And I understand like how crazy the whole story itself does sound. And it's just the fact that 4 of us saw it. It wasn't like I saw it and I'm trying to convince my friends that, like, hey, you guys don't see that? Are you crazy? Like, 4 of us saw it. And that's so weird.
When you got out of the car, were there any auditory changes or anything that you could hear, maybe propelling the UFO or the object at all, or was it complete silence?
It was silent. So it was like this weird, ominous object of like a sort kind of coming out, getting on top of us a little bit, us like just in silence and awe, like, oh my, like what's about to happen? And then it kind of just passed over and then like departed.
How close were you to the object, maybe at your closest point?
It seemed like it stopped like a couple 100 feet above us. So it wasn't like plane height. It'd be like a low flying helicopter height kind of deal. Mm-hmm. And it was just so weird. And just looking back on it, it's just, I don't understand. There's nothing else that's ever happened in my life where so many people saw it. And there's still like, I can't Google something right now and make up an explanation. Mm-hmm. Doesn't make sense.
What was the feeling you got, or the sense you got of it? Did it feel as if it were of this earth and maybe a military technology, or did you feel like it was something completely from off planet?
The only other time in my life that I've looked at something and felt the same way was the one time I've ever seen like a tornado. And I was at Wakarusa, and like a tornado was kind of like starting to funnel over campsites, and like that same strikeness of like fear and like we need to act right now, but like you're stuttering. Like when we saw the funnel cloud at Waka, it was like, hey, we need to get in the car. We need to get in the car right now. Like, let's go. And it was like that same kind of like weird, like anxious feeling. And it was just like, you don't really know how to handle it because you're just like, your brain doesn't know what it's even seeing. So like to actually act and do something, there's a lot of stuff going on in the head.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think it sounds crazy at all. There's so many reports and so many non-reports of this kind of stuff. And I think every one of these stories is just a data point in the bigger picture, whether it's seeing military crafts or technology that we've yet to see, or whether it is something extraterrestrial. There's just way too much data to call it something crazy. People see crazy shit, but when enough people see one thing, or basically what you've described is close to what other people have described as well that I've talked to. So it's not, just as far as the shape and the movement and that there's no sound. So now we've got a bunch of people from all over the country talking about something similar that they've experienced. And so it's no longer crazy. It's just data.
Yeah. And I think there is also like a deeper kind of different conversation in my case where like it would bring into the argument of like, if you do see something under like the influence of any type of hallucinogenic like that, like who's to say what's real and fake and stuff like that? Or like, are we seeing things that normally you just wouldn't be able to see? Like a bee sees ultraviolet light, like we can't ever see. And are we just like tapping into a part of the brain that allows us to see that stuff?
That's a fair question. That's an interesting, I never thought about it like that. I always think about it from the opposite side where people might use that to discredit somebody. But I've taken enough LSD in my life that even when I'm peaking, I know what's real and what's not real.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like you're just completely disconnected and 4 people are going to share the same experience in real time, especially on the backside of it, like you said. So it's interesting to think, though, that maybe taking a substance would open up a portion of your brain that would allow you to see something like that. I like that. That's interesting.
That old Cadillac kept a-rolling through southern Texas, counting cars, playing cards, passing time. If you'd signal those big trucks, they might just blow their horn. Riding through Dallas, regretting being born. There's a funeral in Port Arthur, looks like it's gonna be a storm. That sun had faded fast up in Missouri. Big Daddy kept a-driving into the night, up and down the Ozark Hills like rabbits on the run. Being poor and being black in 1961, didn't want to wind up staring down the wrong end of a gun. One truck, 2 gas tanks, and a rifle rack. When he died, I got his plaid shirt and his Seagram's hat. Uncle Bubba didn't have a lot of money. Uncle Bubba had a monkey on his back, and 1 truck, 2 gas tanks, and a rifle rack. Up all the windows, board up all the doors. When that hurricane starts blowing, don't want to hang around no more. 1 truck, 2 gas tanks, and a rifle rack. When he died, I got his plaid shirt and his Seagram's hat. Uncle Bubba didn't have a lot of money. Uncle Bubba had a monkey on his back, and 1 truck, 2 gas tanks, and a rifle rack. and a mule. No, you can't buy a seat in heaven with 40 acres and a mule.
So I'm Scott Anderson, live in Fort Collins, Colorado, and saw what I saw over Longmont, or like the mountains behind Longmont, basically. Essentially, myself and Joel from Genetics were coming back from the Medeski Schofield Martin and Wood show. Maybe smoked pot at the show. I'm not even sure if we had done that. Like, we were poor, whole shebang, but driving back, pretty much completely sober, and driving past Longmont on I-25 out over the mountains, like, just crazy lights, like I'd never seen anything in my life. Like, to me, totally unexplainable, totally unlike anything I had ever seen prior. It didn't look like any kind of aircraft. What we saw was sparkling, moving around freely. Like, they didn't look like they were being propelled, on wings or anything like that, just sort of floating around. And the closest thing I would say is, imagine like a sparkler or comet in the air, but leaving a tail behind it, like really long trails, bright light. And at first we saw one, then we saw two, and then we saw three, and they were sort of in, that classic triangle formation, so to speak. And then two or three more popped up. I don't remember the exact number, but they flew around for a while and then disappeared behind the mountains, basically.
What did you do when you saw them? Did you guys stop, or did you just take note of it and keep moving? And what was your thought at the time as to what it could be, or was it just completely unexplainable?
So we slowed way down, and I mean, if you know Joel as a driver, he's not a slow driver whatsoever. The people around us on the road slowed down too. Other people clearly noticed. I've always, like, when I was a little kid, my mom used to fall asleep listening to the radio, and I would hear Coast to Coast on the, like, middle of the night, like, all the time. So I've always just, like, been interested by UFOs and stuff, and I always thought it would be really cool to see something. So I was, like, kind of freaking out, like, thought it was really awesome, like, holy shit, like, I have no idea what this is.
That was your moment of, like, yeah, oh man, you get to experience this thing.
Yeah, and then I was also like, oh man, now I have to tell people, like, I've seen a UFO, and my family's gonna think I'm nuts and this and that. Yeah, the funny thing is, years later, after I'd, gone around and been like, I saw something that I couldn't identify. I'm not trying to say it was aliens, but I couldn't identify it. Saw on Facebook or YouTube, like, suggestion or something, I don't know, the exact same thing. And it turns out it's nighttime parachuters, and they strap flares to their feet, and they jump out of planes, and they, fly in formations and go do things that you wouldn't expect something to do in the sky. So it was also really cool I'm, as much as I love aliens and UFOs and shit, I'm also, like, a science person, and it's like, well, I was excited, but it turns out it wasn't that, and that's the way it is sometimes. Like,
I think it's so rare when people actually get an answer to these sort of things. So that's why I really like this story, is because you got that moment, you got to hold on to it for a few years, and then you still got an explanation, which is really great.
Yeah.
When you get the official explanation and you saw what that was, are you able to completely overlay that with what you saw and concur that that's probably what you saw?
Oh, it was identical. Like, I had no question in my mind. As soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, yeah, that's what we saw. And I mean, I haven't gone and looked it up. I did at the time. I looked up like, just random sightings and stuff. Like, went on Google to see, like, did anyone else see this? And other people in Longmont had seen it. Funny enough, I haven't gone back and seen what their nighttime skydiving company in Longmont is, but I imagine there's something out there, unless it was military training. But,
yeah, they do a lot of military stuff all up and down the Front Range, so it wouldn't surprise me if it was military. But I love that story, and like I said, I'm so glad that you got an answer for what you saw.
Hello, everybody. My name is Pete Kartsunis. I am live from Bend, Oregon, where I reside now. And I'm stoked to be a part of this talk and this conversation about UFO sightings. When I saw the post, I was really excited to jump in if I could, because it's a topic that I love talking about. It gets me high, so to speak, just talking about it. And I moved to Pagosa Springs, Colorado, in 1994 via Michigan, Flint, Michigan. And I remember just before moving there, my buddy's like, "Are you going to go chase UFOs?" And I was like, "That's funny you say that. I hope so." I get out to Pagosa Springs, and there's this group of people called Mission Control that lives there or lived there. This woman, Zeej, was a leader kind of that group. I don't know if they still exist there, but they were in a little deeper than I have been in. Like, they were waiting for the mothership to come and get them, and all that stuff. And that's cool. I won't judge. It's cool if it does come and get them. I won't, all right, cool. I might want to be on that ride. But my first, so living in Pagosa, then I was very close to a hot spot. One of the hottest spots in the world on this whole planet is the San Luis Valley. So that is about 65, 75 miles east of, a little northeast of, or pretty much straight east of Pagosa Springs, Colorado. So it's kind of almost in the southwest region of Colorado. And my first sighting, though, was on my 21st birthday, October 17th, 1994. I turned 21, and I went to Phoenix, Arizona to visit a friend of mine. And on the way back, my girlfriend and I were driving up the highway. Don't remember what highway, the main highway from Phoenix that goes north into Flagstaff. And we saw 3 lights in the sky moving very fast, and the first one disappeared. The second 2 moved. The second one disappeared. The third one stopped, dropped diagonally, hovered for a minute, and then dropped straight down. So as all this was going on, I'm like, holy shit, there's UFOs. And I was just getting new to the area, and I was young, and just like always, I'd like to say this. First of all, so many people might look at the sky, but they don't watch the sky. And if you watch the sky, you will see things that could be satellites. But then people who don't watch the sky, they're like, there's no satellites up there. And it's like, dude, just look up. They're everywhere, especially if you're out in Colorado, out in Bend, Oregon, where I live. Last night, my friend Jamie and I were sitting outside looking out, and we saw an interesting, I think it was a satellite, but it was bright, and it wasn't blinking, and felt like it was doing, sometimes the mind plays tricks on you when you want to see something. Mm-hmm. But then there's the inevitable. Then there's the no doubt scenario that's what I saw. And so I started looking into what's going on there, and supposedly there's a military base near the Grand Canyon. Okay, so maybe there's some activity going on with something, I always like to kind of look at both sides of the coin, but I know what I see and I know what I believe. So that to me was my first UFO sighting. But then that takes me, and I looked up the date while I was waiting to get on this. This was in 1996, October 29th. I went to go see The Who in Denver at McNichols Arena. And they were doing the Quadrophenia tour. And my buddy took me, and we went and rocked it out. And it was like Meatloaf and Billy Idol were there as part of the Bellboy and the other thing. It was really amazing concert. And on the way back, we had to drive 285 through the San Luis Valley. Now, living in Colorado and being a full-time musician, I've done tons of driving through the San Luis Valley, hundreds of times, and always fascinated by the energy of that place. It's the biggest valley at that elevation anywhere in the world. So I don't know what the exact dimensions are, but something like 70-some miles long and 76 miles long, let's say, by 52 miles wide, somewhere in that range. So you can see it from outer space. And it's the highest elevated valley. Well, it's full of cows, too, and that's a whole nother topic I'd love to talk about. And there's cow mutilations there all the time. And sometimes they make the news. Even today, they still make the news. And for some reason, people seem obligated to send me those articles. I remember my mom saying, "Why are all these people posting cow mutilation videos on your Facebook page?" And I had to explain to my mom that I'm really into this UFO phenomenon with cow mutilations. Well, those happen in the San Luis Valley, and they have been for a very long time. Then October 30th, 1996, my friend Lauren and I were driving back. It was probably 2 in the afternoon. And in 1996, you could drive from the San Luis Valley to Durango and not really pass a ton of cars, because back in that day, you could drive after a gig at 2 a.m, driving from Durango to Pagosa. We might not see one car and a couple herd of elk, and that's all that was out there back then. Obviously, there's a lot more people on the planet nowadays, and in that region, of course. So now it's not like that as much, but we were on our way back. 2 p.m, we're hanging out, just talking. We're straight sober. We're not high. We're not stoned. We're not, anything. I look up at the sky above. It was the western slope of the San Luis Valley, where there's a lot more sightings. There a lot of them. They say the western slope from New Mexico on up to Sawatch is this hot spot. And I look and I see one bright light in the middle of the daytime, blue skies. It wasn't a plane, because sometimes the sun does reflect on a plane and you see a light and it does disappear. I get it. It's changing. But this was a bright light above one of the mountains. Not a small mountain, but not a big mountain, like a foothill. And I went, holy shit, look at that. And we watched it. And this is when there was no traffic. So we pulled over and I got a napkin out. Now this one light turned into 5 lights. That was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 1, 2, 3, and then the one in the center. And it turned into 5 lights. And I drew on the napkin while we were watching it. And it probably was, it was probably about a 2.5 minute visual. And we're like tapping each other and looking like, dude, this is a UFO. This is a UFO. And I'm like, it's a freaking UFO. And it turned into a perfect shape of what we know as a UFO. The round, it goes up and then has the little cone cylinder on the top. And it was a milky gray purple ship. So it went to the lights to turn into this ship. And it was hovering above one of the mountain, or that foothill. And it was sitting above it. And we're flipping out. And it was almost like it was transparent. Like it wasn't a solid mass, but it was definitely something we were looking at that was a distinct shape of the classic shape of what everybody says they see, the classic shape you see in all the posters and all of this and that. So then that morphed into those 5 lights and all of them just disappeared.
Was there any sort of sound?
No, and we were probably 15 miles away from that hilltop. So we were driving straight west on 285, just under, what's the first, there's Sagwatch, but then there's that one, I can't think of it, but it's when you first come south from Salida, and you just hit the San Luis Valley. There's that little spot with a little gas station, a little market, and a little coffee house and whatnot, and a lot of UFO paraphernalia. Those people know, man, they see that stuff all the time. So anywhere you go in the San Luis Valley, there's pictures of UFOs or paintings or something, because those people live amongst that stuff every day.
Yeah, like I was saying earlier, the UFO watchtower is down there, which is kind of this gimmicky little dome with a viewing deck on top and a little garden of alien junk, I would almost call it, out front. We always stop. I love it. I love that a place like that even exists. There aren't all these sightings for no reason. There's a bigger picture being painted. And whenever I talk to folks about this, it opens up to so many more and more people having some sort of experience that they can't explain, whether military, whether extraterrestrial. There's so many things that can create these experiences. What was the sense you got from what you saw?
Totally not connected to this planet. And literally straight sober, watching this thing for 2.5 minutes above a mountain go from 5 lights to a shape to back to 5 lights and then disappear. Well, since then, I've studied this UFO phenomena for many, many years and looked into it. And so many of stories of the same exact shape, of the same exact thing, have been written down and written about and documented. And so, like, every time I see that. Now, one of those instances was at the UFO Watchtower. I pulled in one day, and the woman came from her house, which is about, a quarter mile away. And I saw the dust behind her car, and she drove and noticed that there was somebody there, because not a lot of people go there some days. And it was like a weekday. And she pulled up, and I was in Creede, Colorado, which is not far in those hills. playing a gig, and somebody said, "Hey, did you hear about the cow mutilation last night?" And I'm like, "No." And people always feel obligated to tell me this. It's funny because it's weird to hear that, but I'm into this thing. So I'm like, "No, when?" And they're, "Oh, last night there was a cow mutilation in the San Luis Valley, another one." Oh man! So I made it a point to drive a different route to go up to the watchtower, and the woman came up and we were talking, and she's like, "No, make yourselves at home." So I was looking around and I saw a newspaper article stapled to the side on this bulletin board, and it literally had the same exact image. It was the milky gray UFO shape, like the perfect UFO shape, and it talked about the lights disappearing and how it looked transparent, yet it wasn't. It was a solid. And it was everything, note for note, man. I'm like, this is exactly what I saw. So I started talking to her about it. Now, she'll claim that she's never seen anything, and I think she does that just to stay out of it.
I've talked to a woman there who had a laundry list of stories.
Really?
I know there's a few different women. I was there 2 weeks ago, and there was another woman there I didn't recognize, and we've been there a handful of times. But that's really interesting that she would claim she hasn't seen anything, especially if she runs the UFO Watchtower.
I know. Well, then I was like, well, she's obviously winking me, right. And just like not wanting to go there. But I asked her about the cow mutilation, and she said that she writes for that paper there in Saguache, and she just took photos and just got them developed. I'm like, she goes, "Do you want to see them?" I'm like, "Yeah, I want to see them." Like, and I'm not a weird dude, man. I don't want to see cow mutilations, but I do want to see this topic of cow mutilation. So sure enough, the side of the face was cut off, the anus was cut out, the uterus was taken out, and that's been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years, and it's been going on for hundreds of years in the San Luis Valley. And there's a great book that came out in 1996 by a guy named Christopher O'Brien. He was a local musician out of Alamosa, and I've known him. I met him when his band used to come through Pagosa, and I used to sit in and sing with his band. And he's like way into this because he grew up out in the San Luis Valley, and Alamosa is literally in the San Luis Valley. So he wrote this book called The Mysterious Valley. I don't know if you've read that book.
I have not, but I'll look into that.
Oh, yeah, Christopher O'Brien, The Mysterious Valley. Somebody gave me a copy of that book in 1996 when it came out. He interviewed all these farmers and ranchers out there that tell them their story of their cow mutilations and their sightings. And every single farmer and every single ranch owner out in the San Luis Valley has many stories. And a lot of them have firsthand stories of their cows being mutilated, dropped, the ribs were broken, no blood, uterus taken out, anus cut out, side of the face cut out. Well, this is a valley you can see from outer space full of cows. So I want to get back to that topic. I just want to get back to the UFO sighting stuff really quick. Sure. So I saw that UFO, and then I'm just fascinated because now I've been out west for little under 2 years, and I've seen 2 sightings that I know for a fact. At least the last moving object that stopped, then dropped diagonally, hovered, and we were pulled over on the highway along with about 6 other cars that pulled over on the highway to watch that. Like, it wasn't like it just happened really fast. We were all watching. Everybody's taillights kind of went on because it was like really bright in our desert sky north of Phoenix and all that. There's that Bumblebee Highway or whatever, and it winds you around and takes you up to Sedona's right there and all that. So literally they were the brightest things in the sky. So I'm fascinated. So I start looking up at the sky, and I left to move to Boulder, Colorado in 1999. And it was just before 1999. One, there's the Aztec crash. We all know about the Roswell crash. There's the Dulce, New Mexico underground bunker that's got endless stories of weirdness happening in there. And man, you go there, and that place is just a trip anyways. And there's a UFO crash down in Dulce, New Mexico. There's all kinds of weird, a lot of activity. Right there, there's Bandelier and that whole area north of near Taos and north of Santa Fe. Like that whole area, there's the Anasazis. There's the fact that the Anasazis drew petroglyphs of guys with big eyes and little mouths on their petroglyphs from 1700, 1800 years ago. There's, I think, maybe a reason why all of them just disappeared. They say they eventually became the Hopis. Some say that's bullshit. I don't really care. I just want to know where they all went. So,
yeah, sure.
Why
Sure.
did they draw UFOs? Why did the Egyptians draw UFOs on their beautiful paintings 5,000 years ago?
Mhm.
It's a no-brainer to me
Mhm.
that there's been this going on for a very long time. And my dad had somebody that he worked with in the 70s. I was born in 73, so this was probably 78, 79. My dad was a, very smart professor, dean of Purdue, yada, 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 smart man. And he had a colleague that didn't come home for 3 days and claimed he was abducted by UFOs, and everyone called him crazy, and he ended up losing his family and left his job and then committed suicide because no one would believe him. Well, I remember hearing about this story and was always fascinated by that story, and then of course Fire in the Sky came out 15 years later or whatever, and that's a fascinating story about the mountains right up around kind of where I'm at, Montana-ish, and then up in here in the Northwest. But that being said, for years and years and years, people were written off as just, you're nuts, man, you're nuts. But then, okay, cool. Well, now a million stories later, 25 books, what about the Phoenix Lights? I mean, I have friends that
Witnessed
are conservatives.
by thousands of people.
Yeah, and I have friends that are conservatives that are, you wouldn't think would believe in this because they're conservatives. And they're like, no, we were there, man. It was a mile-long ship, didn't make noise, and flew over the city of Phoenix.
I think just the volume of the reports and the range of the locations. I just think that it's no longer about being crazy or not. Though every single person I talk to mentions craziness, which you automatically start defending yourself when you start talking about stuff like this, as if millions of other people haven't witnessed the same thing, It's interesting. It's interesting to see that. One thing I wanted to mention about the San Luis is up that way is another kind of area of energy, which is Crestone, which some people call it the spiritual center of America. And it's a very cool vibe of ashrams and temples up there in the mountains. And that's also in that area. And I think that's interesting too, that this area not only attracted those folks to Crestone, but also is attracting some other sort of energy or something else.
Plus those sand dunes. I mean, you can see the sand dunes from outer space. And there's also like artifact and woolly mammoth discovered there, hunting artifact from way back when, way before Christopher Columbus, by the way. And there were some people hunting and stuff back in those days. I mean, that was prehistoric country. There was dinosaurs and whatnot through that area, all the way through Colorado, all the way to Red Rocks and that whole area, Dinosaur Hill and all that.
It's a very, very special region, very, very special part of the world, and it doesn't surprise me that there's a lot of activity there.
Yeah, absolutely. And then for me, it really just goes back to, okay, so for years and years, people were saying they're cloning us, E.T., they're cloning us, all these movies, Alien, whatever, they're always showing these incubators and these ships, and people are being messed with around their genital area and yada, yada, yada. Well, people saying they've been abducted say that they were messed with in that area. Women, men, sperm and eggs, So a lot of people are like, you're crazy. Well, okay, let's just add a couple million more people that say they've been abducted and this has happened to them. Well, it's not so crazy anymore. One, the way that these cows were mutilated way back before we even had any laser technology or technology to cut an incision like that, to remove an organ. This isn't bullshit. This is actual shit that happened.
And
so
the volume of incidents.
Yeah, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cows with their uteruses taken out. Now, there's some people, there was a cow mutilation maybe 6 months ago or so, and they asked the woman at the ranch, and she said she thinks it's some satanic ritual. Sorry, it's not satanic ritual. One, well, it's really weird, though, because there wasn't any blood, and then apparently they were dropped, and their ribs and everything were broken, so they were lifted, like you always see the picture of the beam and the cow. That's actually comes from facts and claims.
Well, all of this comes from somewhere. These images, especially the repetition of the description of the images. I mean, it's not like somebody in China and somebody in America are just going to randomly come up with a precise, exact image of something, that they've seen. So just the universal aspect of the features and the details of the descriptions.
spende pugine. Moja wego mi mui pasi, ube nikali chipati, ne pani vitu koka machizi, kubanda se tasizi. Moja wego mi mui pasi, ube nikali chipati, ne pani vitu koka machizi, kubanda se tasizi. Sirayaka muzuri mama, muzuri mama, muzuri mama, muzuri mama. Pasaba like a mama. Na unique lishe niku oe mama siende popote jamoyo wangu shakubale umenikali chapati nitakolenda kama polisi itabidi nigumare moyo wangu shakubale umenikali chapati nitakolenda kama polisi itabidi nigumare yesu yako muzuri mama. Picard and Skidogo, Picard and Skidogo, and Skidogo, Picard and Skidogo, and Skidogo, Picard and Skidogo, and Skidogo. Sorayaka Muzuri Mama, Muzuri Mama, Muzuri Mama, Muzuri Mama, Habasama Lakomaha, Muzuri Mama, Muzuri Mama. Muzuri mama, Sorayaka Muzuri mama, oh, Muzuri mama, so beautiful, Muzuri mama, hey, 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 hey. Muzuri mama, hey, Muzuri mama, so, hey, hey, hey. Muzuri mama, mama,
when it was getting closer to my time of moving to Boulder, which was in 1999, I kept seeing the bright light in the sky. Looked like it was first it was in Arbalese on the reservoir there with a group of people, and then it happened with musicians at Four Corners Folk Festival one year about 3:34 in the morning. We were still picking. Justin Hoffenberg, myself, Gus, and Beth Cook, and Murph Murphy, and all these guys. We're all hanging out, and I said, "Oh, look at that!" And it was a bright light. This happened at least 7-8 times, and almost every time but one, I had a group of people with me, and it would illuminate a light not on us but towards us, and it was definitely the brightest thing in the sky. And then I would always say, "Okay, now it's gonna take off and shoot. Watch this shit." And everyone's like, and I'm like, "No, seriously, watch." And sure enough, it would just take off until you could not see it anymore, and it would go fast. And it happened. It would move, it would stop, it would be bright, and then it'd take off into space. And I kept seeing that. I saw it 6-7 times around Pagosa Springs, around that range, where just the other side of that is the San Luis Valley. So there's so many things. People said they see doors in the side of the mountain. I that's weird for me because I'm like, I have to see it to believe it. But I've seen the UFOs, so I know for a fact that they exist.
I think it's important for people to talk about these kinds of things. I mean, more and more actual research is coming out, and it's really interesting to kind of reach an age, we're in 2020 and we're starting to actually see some substantial evidence of there being other life. And I think that it's important for people to speak up and talk about it. If more and more substantial people step forward, I think that maybe that money can be filtered towards this. It's really interesting. I'm glad you're doing this.
I've heard one theory, like back in, you can't test it, but when the Pilgrims were coming to the coast, the Indians saw the breaking water before they saw the boats, because their brains couldn't actually tell them, like, oh, you're seeing this giant thing. So they could see the parting in the water, but they couldn't see the boat because their brain couldn't, like, say to them, like, oh, that's a boat, because their brain couldn't even make the drawing out,
Yeah, it was a really cool moment in the fact that, like, to know and to not think I'm like crazy, like to just be like, that's exactly what it is. There it is, plain and simple. And I'm amazed I haven't seen it before or since.
Sounds like I need to head back down to the San Luis sometime soon and maybe make a stop in Pagosa Springs for a few nights of camping and sky watching.
Dude, I'd love to join you, man. I miss that area, Colorado in general. Thanks, Justin. I appreciate it. I love you bringing attention to this kind of thing.
Thank you for listening to Galaxy Tenants. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, like, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. For early access to episodes and exclusive content, check us out on Patreon. Also, if you'd like to communicate with us, send an email to galaxytenants@gmail.com or leave a voicemail on the Galaxy Tenants hotline at 303-550-2065.
You've reached the Galaxy Tenants hotline. Please leave a message.